Communication goal number 1, lower the bar. Liz is far too generous. I want to start by saying thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to be part of this series. I'm one of the folks that watches the videos from her desk or listens on my smartphone, and I've learned a lot from the videos that have been posted, so it's just an honor to be part of this. I want to thank Katarina and Marcus and Elizabeth and the great folks at Maytree. You make this very easy to be part of and a privilege to be part of your community, and of course Alan Broadbent. There are a handful of people in this world that I can never say no to, and he's one of them. So, but even if he weren't here, I'd be delighted to be. And some of my Civic Action colleagues are here. So Jeff and Sarah, Brooke and Dua, and I think some folks will be watching it after from the office as well. So yes, our topic is going to be about impactful communications on a shoestring budget. And as you heard from Elizabeth, I did spend a bit of time in my career in the Ontario government. About 10 years, in fact. And at one point, I ran a comm shop, communication shop, and it was one of the bigger ones. I had about 49 staff. And I remember at one point, the deputy ministers, I worked for 2 deputy ministers, and they called me into their office one day, and they said, Sev, results-based planning time, we're going to want to reduce the size of the organization by 5%, 10%. I remember going like, what? That's crazy. How am I gonna run this comm shop with 40 whatever people, not 49 people? And I think back to that moment because then I joined the nonprofit sector. And until very recently, my communication shop was Sarah, can you please put up your hand? Sarah and half of Yelena. And now we have Jeff and Sarah and half of Yelena. So this sector wows me. And I think the NGO sector's ability to do stuff on a shoestring relates to not only communications, but relates to finance, audit, program delivery. It amazes me, and I think back to how government asks for the NGO sector, how much time do you put on administration? And I think, wow, if there's ever a sector that another sector could learn from on how to do as little administration as possible, it's this sector. So I'm going to talk about communication, and it's important for a few reasons. One is your work. So the NGO sector, in my view, powers society. You could eliminate other chunks of the world, and they could run not as well, but reasonably decently. You could not run the planet without the NGO sector. So it's so important to our work because our work is important to having civil society thrive. 2, importantly, the competition in the NGO sector has never been bigger. We have the 2nd largest NGO or charitable sector in the world. There is not a natural culling of our sector with mergers and acquisitions or with a change in government. And so the size of it is getting bigger, the needs are getting bigger, and the importance for the unique value proposition of our organizations individually is getting bigger. So that's the 2nd reason why it's so important. And the 3rd reason is more on the personal level. We are the most connected generation and set of people to ever walk the planet. We are equally the loneliest people to ever walk the planet. And if you are surprised by those correlations, you shouldn't be, because quantity doesn't mean quality. And we get that in our personal lives. And somehow we forget that, because in the world of the CP24 news ticker and the 140 character tweets, we can become part of a machine unwittingly where we think we're delivering communications, and we're not, because we forgot the basics. I'm a mom. Anybody in the room in here is a parent? Remember when you bring the kid home from the hospital the first time, you're like, oh my God, how's this gonna roll? And the doctor says, well, you'll know the difference because the nuance in the cries. I thought, what? There's different cries? There's different cries, aren't there? You know in those first 2 weeks how to distinguish the cry, well for me maybe 4 weeks, how to distinguish the cry between I'm tired, the cry where I'm hungry, the cry that I'm bored, I need a diaper change. We are actually genius communicators right out of the womb. Nuance is everything. Nuance is not a 140 character tweet. Nuance is not a faxed news release. But nuance is the core of good communications to our sector, to any sector, and to any audience you want to connect with. So I'm going to share some of my what I think are some good ideas. And these aren't my ideas. These are just my culmination, if you will. I've culled some of the ideas that I hope we'll share with you. I've got my little clock here. Stay on time. First one, data is your seatbelt, but stories put you in the driver's seat. Now, I texted my friend Sandeep, whom I used to work with in the Ontario government. I said, remember when we said that all the time, data is your seat? And we used to do this like motion, data is your seatbelt, click. And it's now become this thing. And my team knows when they bring something forward for my sign-off, they'll even say, Sev, the data's in there, the data's in there, because they know data is your seatbelt. And what that means in this world of communications where we can look at the surface for a lot of things, substance gets lost. And back running a strategy shop, when we first coined that phrase, data is your seatbelt, it was because things, you'd hear people say anecdotes, and then somehow anecdote made its way into a cabinet submission or a policy paper, and you're like, wait, what's the data that substantiates that view? So data is your seatbelt. Why is this important for communications? How many of you in the room do anything with the private sector? All of us do. How about with the government? All of us do. We're speaking their language when we're talking about data, right? How do you quantify it? What's the empirical research say? What's that information look like? You need to have the kind of information that they use for many of their decision-making moments. So data is your seatbelt. But it's not enough to compel somebody. Like, data relates to part of our brain, but actually the part of your brain that is reserved for the most impact is around storytelling. And it's those individual stories that will truly put you in the driver's seat. So our brains crave stories. Any parent who knows when the screen goes dead and the iPad is drained in the back seat, good Lord, you've got 90 minutes yet to get there, I start telling the kids stories. And I swear we could be in that car telling stories for hours and they will just listen. Because there's part of your brain that actually only turns on when a story is being told, the link of emotion that goes in there. So logic has a role, but emotion has an even bigger role. So I can tell you that climate change is coming. And I can tell you that extreme weather means that the floods that used to happen every 40 years are now happening every 6. I get that. I register. And then I can tell you that there's a mom who 2.5 weeks ago, in those massive floods that swept parts of our city, but parts of the southern US, a mom from Arkansas whose SUV tipped over in the rain, and she held her 2 children as tight as she could as the floodwaters pulsed them and pushed them into the current. And she lost her 18-month-old and her 4-year-old child. They were swept. Imagine as a parent, hanging on with everything you've got, and your kids are swept away from you from the extreme rains that swept through your town. I'm going to tell you guys, the next time a big major flood comes, or the warning, you may remember that 40-year floods happen every 6, but you are going to remember that story of that Arkansas mom. So, data is your seatbelt, but stories put you in the driver's seat. This one's more uplifting, so I don't want you to think it's going to be all downer the whole afternoon. So the next one is pick coffee over the computer. So I used to live in the US, in Washington, D.C. And about, 15 years ago, I can't quite do the math, but I decided, okay, let's move back to Canada. I knew nobody, and LinkedIn wasn't a thing. And so I remember thinking, gosh, I got to find a job, and how am I going to do this? So I started to meet with people. And somehow in the back of my head, I got this idea that if I met with 67 people, I would have enough to have a very good network, enough to find that next job. And in my head, I was trying to find a job. I wasn't actually thinking about the relationships or the network. So I started to build this list of 67. I'd come back to my computer. It was on an Excel chart. I'd put the name, I'd put the date, this was my little project, my list of 67. Can I tell you, that list of 67, I don't even know how big that list is now. Yes, I found a job, probably somewhere around number 13 to 15. But I kept going. Because the people that I was meeting in my quest to build out the list of 67 were so fascinating. They were interesting people. I was new to this town. I wanted to know where the best restaurants were. I wanted to know who the great leaders to learn from were. I wanted to know what the best bookstore or the best place to grab a cappuccino were. Well, you find that through the list of 67. What you don't find in communication, you can LinkedIn on every day. I don't know how many LinkedIn requests I get, anywhere from 3 to 13. I don't know who these people are. And we're Canadian, we're polite, so first, well, maybe I know them, so I should go. No! If you have to stop and think, do I know this person? It's not in your network. And the importance of picking coffee over the computer means you have an opportunity to form a meaningful relationship where communication can happen on multiple levels as well, not just the surface. Someone said to me once, if you can break bread with somebody, if you can have a meal with somebody, have a coffee with somebody, that's where something magic happens. And I think back to my own family. I'm from a big family. I'm the eldest of 5. And when we were kids and we would be, dating or whatever, everyone in our house knew it was real. It didn't matter if you were dating somebody for 18 years. When you brought them home for the meal, that was serious. Because there's something about the meal. There's something about sharing food. Conversation differs when you have a conversation over food or a beverage or whatever, or pints on a patio. And so when you think about 5 good ideas about communication, you may not think about a coffee or about a cocktail or about a meal. But honestly, one of the best ways to have communication is to have meaningful relationships, and one of the ways to get that is through that medium. Good idea number 3. All the news that's fit to print, not only scroll. Who here follows Fox News on Twitter? Good for you. Why do you think I say that? I am not I'm a nonpartisan, non-political, blah, 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 but Fox News doesn't validate my personal or political views. Fox News has its finger on millions, tens of, hundreds of millions of people's views who are not always part of conversations like today. So one of the best ways to communicate is to know what the audience is thinking. And if you only pay attention to people like you, I had the chance to meet Joan back there for the first time today. Joan's come to these sessions before, and she says you get to meet new friends and you get to see some familiar faces. The problem is with communications is we can get used to thinking that what is familiar is in fact the norm, or what is familiar is right. Wrong. Force yourself, go to the magazine rack, scan the stands, and pick a magazine that you would not normally pick. Sometimes what I used to do when I was coming out of university, I missed school, I loved university. I would go to the bookstore and I would read this, look at they would have the classes in the bookstore, which class, and I would think, what class would I have loved to have taken? And I bought those books, and those are the books that I read. You have to push yourself, and social media makes this really hard because Facebook feeds gives you what you think you want to read, and your Twitter followers, I have to click to decide I'm going to follow you. It is so important to push yourself for what the news is going to be that you're going to follow, because who you're communicating to and what sources of information they rely on and pull from is going to be different. Reading Hillary Clinton, this new book called Shattered. It's about why Hillary Clinton lost the election. And there's this really powerful quote in there in the beginning, and she's talking with her advisors, and she's just blown out of a couple of the primaries, and she's baffled. This was supposed to be hers in the bag, right? And she says in there, I just don't know what people are thinking. And I read this line, I think, that's a problem, because you're a Clinton. And you have at your fingertips every resource for every information or every person ever called, and you don't know what people are thinking. Because the silos, right? The echo chamber that we end up falling into. And you don't need to be an elected official to fall into an echo chamber. 85% of senior government officials on the non-political side, 85% have done nothing other than work for government before. That's an echo chamber. Our sector, getting out of it, flexing our muscles in other areas, that's important. But the diversity of sources of your information is absolutely key. It makes you smarter, it makes you better, your curiosity will lead you into different areas, and it'll up your game when you're dealing with stakeholders and donors and the public, and understanding how your messages may or may not resonate. former colleague, she used to say this great line. She used to say, "That which interests my boss fascinates me." And she knew that to get something approved, there would be certain sources that boss would be asking, "Well, did you check the Harvard Business Review?" And she said, "Yes, I did. And I read that book that you enjoyed, really liked it." So there was a way of playing to the audience that she had sort of figured out. And another deputy minister that I had the privilege of serving, she said to me, "It's your job." I was in her office in a sort of chief of staff role, and she said, "It's your job to get me out of Queen's Park every 6 weeks. Get me to other parts of the province that I would not ordinarily go to. I want my news sources to be different. I want to pick up a local paper. I want to talk to a lady on the bus at the bus terminal. I want to get out of the vacuum." You're in a vacuum. Unless you force yourself, we're all in one. So that third point around all the news that's fit to print, not only scroll, is about being curious and pushing where your information is going to come from. The fourth, invite yourself to a pithy party regularly. I sometimes joked if I had a third kid, I would name said kid Pithy, because it's just one of my all-time favorite words. And it summarizes for me in this context the importance of brevity. While I worked for government, I had great privilege of watching many ministers get briefed. You could always tell the first time someone briefed a minister, because it was a train wreck 100% of the time. 100% of the time. So the person would come in, and the minister, you were supposed to have 30 minutes, and the person has a, 29-page slide deck. You end up with 25% of the time, the minister's office staff is going to intervene with some questions, because that's what they get to do. And you get off your message, and you're like, but I know how to do it in 30 minutes. The ability to communicate your message in 25% of the time you think you're going to have, and in a one-pager, in a text, if you can't communicate your message to a donor, to a partner, tell your story, your package in one page and no more than a 10-page slide deck. Those are sort of my rule of thumb. So when I'm practicing for a briefing, whether it's with a senior executive, whether it's with our board, assume you may lose time. That person needs to leave early. Oh, a phone call just came in. Oh, the minister's late. So if you can deliver in 25% of the time, if you can summarize something in a one-pager, and if you're going to do a slide deck, it better not be more than 10 pages. If you can do all that, fabulous. Because a pithy party is a party you want to be invited to, and you'll be invited back. Word count. This is also very important. Visitors, apparently on social media pages and others, only read 18% of the content beyond a 1,250 word limit. So think about that. We've got all these wonderful newsletters, and you keep scrolling, and even on your smartphone, at a certain point, I stop scrolling, my own interest. And the human, you have about 8 seconds as an attention span, so you stop scrolling. It's the same with the information that's going to be posted. So keep it simple, keep it brief, and when you're going to be briefing, you better understand the audience that you're speaking to, and not use the jargon which may be familiar to us, and you're speaking German to the audience. So avoid the jargony language. The fifth piece that I want to talk a little bit about is called never underestimate the impact of gift wrap. So all of us know we've done these amazing slide decks, and we have spent some time thinking about it, and it's well researched, and then you look at it, and it's full of words, and it's kind of flat and one or two dimensional. The importance of presentation is so key. You go to a fine dining restaurant, and at the end of your meal, that guy comes out with that weird little knife thing that takes all the breadcrumbs away, right? And scrapes those breadcrumbs off. I don't know where they go, but he scratches the table and the breadcrumbs go like this, and then the lights somehow dim and the music gets a little quieter, and I don't know, the person across from you seems more attractive after he cleaned the breadcrumbs and turned down the lights and turned the music. Like, something happens. That's the gift wrap of the moment. That's why you pay $38 for that entree. Never underestimate the impact of gift wrap. We spend so much time on content. Data is your seatbelt. Stories are putting you in the driver's seat. And then we forget about the gift wrap. There are some free sites where you can get stock photography. And Jeff, thank you for that on our little one-pager there. You've got some links on where you can find that. having a polished presentation, spend the money, and even if you don't have on staff, because at times we haven't, a dedicated communications person that has that visual flair, find someone and pay $500 for a good template, and then use that over and over and over and over again. Update it with your own content, but get something designed that matches your colors, that does your, don't cheap on this, and don't overlook this. It is human nature to be attracted to visually intriguing things. Work with that. And I remember working on a file once. We had an external advisory panel that we were serving. My God, we had about 8 to 10 little iterations, if you will, of this report, of a 50-page report that the panel had written, and we had ghost written on their behalf. It was all their ideas. And then we had to get 8 people to sign off on it. And we'd go to these meetings, and all the 8 were there, and the staff team and myself were there, and we would try to go, and then they kept changing the ideas and kept changing this, and maybe this isn't in there, maybe this isn't, and we were running out of time. There needed to be an announcement by date X. So I came back to the office, I thought, oh my God, what are we gonna do? We're gonna miss the deadline. I don't wanna miss the deadline. We don't miss deadlines. What are we gonna do? And so my colleague said, we're gonna gift wrap it. That's what we're gonna do. I said, oh my God. So we brought in our colleague, Joan, and we gave him this 50-page Word document, and we locked him in an office for 48 hours. We shoved some food under there every once in a while. And Joan came out 48 hours later with the most spectacular report. Visually, the pictures, pop-up boxes, it was spectacular. We went into the next meeting, the very next day. They all signed off on it. It was the same content that we've been talking about for the last 8 meetings, but when you see it presented, it all came together. You're not duping your audience. On the contrary, you're appealing to that part of the brain that only comes alive when it's visually stimulated. So never underestimate the impact of gift wrap. And I hope that that and the other 4 good ideas turned out to be great ideas for you as well. Thank you.